On May 7, 1945, Alfred Jodl signed the Act of Unconditional Surrender of all German forces at France on behalf of Germany. On October 16, 1946, he was hanged. In 1944, Alfred Jodl, the man who was guilty of massacre of millions of civilians, was involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler. But it is said that he backed out later on. He was extremely loyal to the Nazis. In this video, we will talk about a military mastermind turned war criminal. We are going to uncover the haunting journey of Alfred Jodl, from surrender to execution. Alfred Jodl was a top German military officer during World War II and part of the leadership cadre around Adolf Hitler. For his military strategies and orders that led to deaths of his enemies and civilians throughout Europe, Jodl was arrested in 1945 and hanged a year later with several other top Nazis as a war criminal. While doing our research, we found out that there isn't much information about him over the internet, but some sources state his date of birth to be 1892. It is still pretty unclear as to what his actual birth year was. But before we dive into the grim details of his execution and the role he played in the war, there's a side to Alfred Jodl that most people never hear about. But you must know this. Despite his high-ranking position in the German military, Jodl was said to have a soft spot for animals and was known to be particularly fond of his pet dog, which is quite the opposite when it comes to humans. Alfred Jodl had a passion for classical music and was known to play the violin in his free time, showcasing his artistic side outside of his military duties. Jodl was fluent in multiple languages, including French and English, which allowed him to effectively communicate with international counterparts during his time as a military leader. He was an avid reader and history enthusiast. Jodl was known to have a vast personal library and took great interest in studying military strategies and tactics from various time periods. Jodl had a talent for writing poetry and was known to compose verses in his spare time, demonstrating a more introspective and creative side to his personality. Alfred Jodl was executed as part of the Nuremberg executions. After being found guilty at the Nuremberg trials for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against peace. The Nuremberg executions took place on October 16, 1946, shortly after the conclusion of the Nuremberg trials. 10 prominent members of the political and military leadership of Nazi Germany were executed by hanging. Hans Frank, Wilhelm Frick, Alfred Jodl, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, and many more were also scheduled to be hanged on that day, but committed suicide using a potassium cyanide capsule the night before. Alfred Jodl's loyalty to the Nazi ideology was clear in a speech he gave in November 1943, where he discussed the role of the Nazi Party. He said that their fight for power within Germany was actually preparation for freeing the country from the Treaty of Versailles. Jodl was saying that the Nazi Party's rise to power wasn't just about controlling Germany, but also about undoing the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which had been imposed on Germany after World War I. The treaty had placed heavy penalties on Germany, and Jodl believed that the Nazi Party was fighting to restore Germany's strength and independence by removing those penalties. This speech showed Jodl's deep belief in Nazi goals and his support for their efforts to rebuild Germany's power. He also stated in a speech on the occasion of the attempted assassination of Hitler that his aims had been in general agreement with the aims of the party. During the Nuremberg trials, Alfred Jodl's defense was based on a struggle with loyalty. He, like other top Nazi officials, argued that he had a tough choice: stay loyal to his bosses, especially Adolf Hitler, or do what was right and refuse illegal orders. Jodl and others said that their military duty forced them to follow commands, even if those orders were wrong. They used this conflict between loyalty and morality to explain why they acted the way they did during the war. Key elements of the loyalty conflict in Jodl's situation: allegiance to Hitler and the Nazi regime. As the chief of the operations staff of the Wehrmacht, Jodl showed profound loyalty to Hitler. His role demanded strict compliance with the Führer's orders, even when those orders surrounded war crimes and other heinous acts. Many Nazi leaders, including Jodl, contended that failing to obey could lead to awful consequences, including execution or imprisonment. Military obligation versus ethical duty. The conflict for Jodl was between his duty as a soldier, which meant being loyal to his superiors in the government, and his bigger ethical duty to avoid breaking international laws and human rights. His defense was based on the idea of following superior orders, meaning he felt forced to obey commands, even if he personally thought those orders were wrong. Dismissal of the just following orders. Argument: the Nuremberg Tribunal dismissed the idea that loyalty to superiors could clear Jodl from accountability for his actions. The court underscored that military officers are duty-bound to reject unlawful orders, particularly those that clearly breach international law, such as the abuse of civilians and prisoners of war. Jodl was convicted because he possessed the authority and duty to challenge or prevent such actions, but chose not to do so. Commitment to military principles. Jodl's professional loyalty to the German military as an institution. Many Wehrmacht officers viewed themselves as bound to uphold the integrity and honor of the military, even under Nazi rule. This sense of loyalty to the military tradition often conflicted with the reality of the crimes they were ordered to carry out by the Nazi regime. What did he do to get such harsh punishment? What exactly did Jodl do to deserve such an extreme punishment at the Nuremberg trials? Was it merely his surrender, or were there darker, more sinister actions that sealed his fate? Jodl ordered the forcible evacuation of all persons in a northern district of Norway, and the burning of all their dwellings. This was to be done so that the inhabitants of that area could not help the Russians. Shortly thereafter, an evacuation took place in Finnmark County in northern Norway, in the course of which 30,000 houses were damaged. Jodl knew of the deportation of workers, for he once told Hitler that the military commander of France had reported that over 220,000 workers had been deported into the Reich in the past 6 months. On 18 October 1942, Hitler ordered that commando troops, even if in uniform, should be killed, not only in battle, but in flight or while attempting to surrender. This order was issued by Jodl's department. But in my opinion, his defense at the Nuremberg trials included the claim that he was merely following orders from his superiors, particularly Adolf Hitler. This argument, often referred to as the superior orders or just following orders defense, was common among Nazi officials. They argued that their actions were directed by higher authority and that disobedience would have resulted in severe punishment. However, the tribunal rejected this defense in Jodl's case, as well as in many others. While it acknowledged the hierarchy of command, the court determined that Jodl had actively participated in and contributed to the planning of aggressive war and atrocities. Not just as a subordinate, but as a decision-maker. He was directly involved in significant military operations, including signing orders that violated international law, such as the directives related to the brutal treatment of prisoners of war and civilians. Therefore, while Jodl may have been influenced by his superiors, his role was more than just one of passive obedience. The Nuremberg Tribunal held that individuals, regardless of rank, are responsible for their actions when those actions contribute to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Jodl's story highlights the dangers of blind obedience and reinforces the importance of moral accountability in times of war. His story remains a powerful reminder that loyalty to leaders or institutions must never override the obligation to uphold justice and human dignity. His last words were, "I salute you, my eternal Germany." Do you think this execution of Jodl was really cruel, or was it just a result of his own deeds?